Frank Schwab, Charles Robinson. I'm Jason Fitz. It's Inside Coverage. It's the Feisty Fridays edition. These two going to fight about anything this morning. Frank is buried in snow right now. Charles, do you have anything positive to say about snow? I want to try and get you guys rolling on an argument out of the gates.
Not unless we're talking about like Narcos.
Wow, jeez. Oh my God. Yeah, we're not talking about that. We're talking about the actual 2 feet of snow in Castle Rock, Colorado this week. So, oh my goodness. I
know Frank likes to party, but that's taking it a little extreme.
Little cocaine reference. Little cocaine reference off the top.
That's the way we get Friday going. All right.
We're feisty out of the great. Can I be honest with you? I would rather shovel my driveway, and it's a pretty substantial driveway, humble brag. I'd rather shovel my driveway than mow the lawn. I hate mowing the lawn. I hate heat. I hate all of that. So I'm actually like Frank's living luxury. He's snowed in. He can just sit there with the warm cup of cocoa, getting all of his football takes out there.
November 8th. I don't want to be snowed in. Like, this sucks. Whatever. Winter's coming early, except in New England where y'all are like 80 degrees every day. I don't get it.
Nah, it's a beautiful thing. All right, Frank is not nestling in with his Nestle's hot cocoa. He is instead sitting here trying to figure out what happened last night. Look, first half was a snoozer. Second half was delightful. We get, dramatic ending. The Ravens beat the Bengals 35-34. C-Rob, can we stick a fork in Cincinnati, or do we take encouragement for the fact that their stars played so well?
Record-wise, we don't stick a fork in them yet, right? I don't think you stick a fork in anyone until we get to probably the 8th loss, right? I mean, you figure 10-7 still has a chance in this league to make it to a wild card. So until they reach that 8th loss, I would not write them off. Defensively, they're horrible. I mean, they can't tackle. If I'm Joe Burrow, I'd be pissed for a number of reasons today. Number one, the defense has got to get it together. This is ridiculous. I mean, it wasn't a defense that sold pieces at the trade deadline. It's got talent right there, and there's some stars obviously on that defense, but the Tylan Wallace play where you just see two guys with horrible tackling efforts. Horrible. And then, if you're Burrow offensively, even without T. Higgins, you have an opportunity to win that game. You go for 2, you don't get it. I didn't like that Burrow didn't say anything to the officials when he got hit in the face on that 2-point conversion. I didn't like that there was clearly defensive holding prior to the pass being thrown on the 2-point conversion. I know it was away from where Burrow was going with the ball, but one thing I did enjoy was Al Michaels straight up said, "Too many games are ending like this." Yeah, Al Michaels with a rip job. And the first thing I thought was, I'll bet Tom Brady couldn't say that. I'm like, cranky ass Al will say stuff on these broadcasts, and he's right. Like, that was a ridiculous moment. You can't. I know people are going to say, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that egregious, whatever. It doesn't matter. The rules are the rules. It was literally a play that determined the outcome of the game. And you had, hands to the face or hands to the head of the quarterback, and you had defensive holding on the exact same play. Neither gets called, and it shifts, at least it shifts the possibility that the end of that game could have ended. I think for Burrow, it has to be frustrating that you are as potent as you are offensively. You're not catching breaks with calls when the game is on the line, and then your defense is just straight up awful. I don't know. I don't know how the Bengals are going to fix this defensively. Maybe they should have actually added at the deadline. But I guess you hope T. Higgins comes back and you can score 40 a game and maybe try to reel off enough wins.
I mean, Joe Burrow in 2 games against the Ravens this year has 9 touchdowns. I believe no interceptions, and he's 0-2 against the Ravens. Like, what are we doing here? I wonder what has really happened to Lou Anarumo's defense. Like, remember a few years ago, we were like, this guy's going to get a head coaching job. He's a mastermind. Yeah. We talked about him like we're talking about Spagnuolo now, and it is just gone. Like, the Bengals defense, they did play well in the first half. I'll give them that. And then the second half, it just fell apart again. And it was troubling. Like that, the long play to Wallace was like, is anybody going to try to tackle
effort play, right? That was an effort play.
Total effort. Yeah, they thought he was out of bounds. They thought he was. They had to have. Like, that's the only way you can excuse that kind of effort. It was just poor. It was really, really poor. Now, getting to the calls, I think we got to talk about the calls. Look, the Minnesota game we all talked about with the Rams game, where there was an obvious face mask in the end zone, but the end of the game. Well, that Minnesota still had like a very small chance to win that game, right? This time, we're talking about a 2-point conversion that's going to go from the 2-yard line to the 1-yard line. Like, That's even better than a 50-50 play that if those calls are made, the Bengals probably win that game. Their entire season looks different. And there's just, the problem is there's just no way to fix this. Like there's no way, there's no replay for this stuff right now when there should be. And, guys were saying, there's various excuses for both calls, right? Okay. The hands to the face by the defensive lineman. He's getting pulled down by the offensive lineman. You can say, well, because of the offensive lineman, that's why he hit him in the face. But we've seen that called every time. Every time a hand gets on a guy's face mask, especially as forceful as it was to Burrow, that's called every game I've seen this season. So I don't really buy that. And then Ryan Fitzpatrick on the Amazon Prime broadcast afterwards was saying, well, I don't mind the non-call on Gesicki because it was away from the play.
That's ridiculous.
Which I thought was ridiculous too. So
oh my God.
Now we're making excuses for this stuff. I just, there's got to be something put in place where we can review this, but also being mindful of, I don't want the last 2 minutes of an NFL football game to take an hour and a half either. I don't want them reviewing every single play for everything.
I think that's an antiquated logic. It doesn't take that long. We see expedited booth reviews all the time in football.
Yeah, they move quickly.
They do now.
So if you're going to have an expedited booth review, which in the college game they do all the time in the middle of it, they'll call it and just whistle up expedited booth review. We're changing that call. There should be an extra official added to every single game that's just sitting in the booth watching it. All they have to do is press a button and say, missed it, that's holding. That doesn't take, even if they add an extra 30 seconds.
Don't you guys worry about, because I think this is true. I think we'd all agree on this. You could call something on just about every play in the NFL if you look hard enough. Right? So don't you worry about every play in the last 2 minutes of a game, we're going to get some kind of, here's a red button. We missed.
But shouldn't we trust that official to have the same discretion that the officials on the field have about what's actually worth calling and what's not worth calling? If we believe that officials have discretion on the field, do we believe that the discretion wouldn't exist in the booth?
The problem is there was a no call. I mean, it's one thing if it's a flag, right, and it gets picked up or, something ridiculous of that nature, but it was a no call. How do you review a play in which no penalty was called?
Right, because then you're reviewing everything.
Then you're reviewing every play, right?
I'm sure if we looked at it, one Bengals offensive lineman was holding. I'm sure if we looked at that play, we could find it.
Right. Look, we could say that. I know we can say that.
I don't know that for sure, but I'm just saying, every play you could call something.
I know, but that's
so
always
you worry about this.
Frank, that's always the counter argument, though. It's well, if we're going to do it that way, every single play has some kind of penalty, and this is ridiculous. And it was like the Chiefs game, right, where clearly there's no doubt Juwan Taylor is moving early, right?
Oh
and so to me, I'm like, it's fine if he's getting away with it. Just don't tell me there's no pre-snap movement. There is. There clearly is. And it's fine. If he gets away with it and they're not flagging it, okay. But don't say he's not moving. He is moving. He's just moving in a way that thus far has not been flaggable, or the officials have felt like they're not going to throw them.
Yeah.
Right. And we've seen countless plays, by the way, called back for something that had nothing to do with, for the argument that the penalty wasn't where he was going with the football.
No, come on. That's just
we see that all the time.
That is absurd.
That's just an absolutely absurd thing for him to even say. When he said it, I'm like, really? What are we doing here? It's not, it's okay not calling that because that's somewhere else on the field. That's not, what the hell? Are you serious? So, okay, if anytime anything happens away from the play, I guess apparently we just don't care what it is.
The quarterback doesn't throw it that way.
It's completely ridiculous. And it wasn't, also, Frank and I last night, we were in the chat discussions on the app, and
a lot of fun, by the way. I enjoyed that. It was really cool.
More people should join in, and so we can all
absolutely
rip Frank all night.
Hey now.
Chase Brown, though, there was another point earlier in the game where he's clearly open in the middle of the end zone, clearly getting held, and nothing happens. And then there's another flag later, which was a little more ticky-tack. I think it was a makeup call. There were multiple moments in this game where you should raise issues, but I just think it's like what Al Michael said. Games should not be ending like this. And this being one, as Frank said, it flips the game. It's a loss. It changes how a season looks for the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals had to have this win. You go for it in that situation. If you're Zach Taylor, maybe this changes. I don't know, Zach Taylor, the seat feels a little hotter, right? Even though no one's going to remember if they suffer, 10 losses this year, 9 losses this year, no one's going to go, well, remember that one, that easily could have been flipped, and Zach Taylor kind of got screwed in that situation. Yeah. I mean, it just, I don't think, I think in a 2-point conversion situation like that, I don't know how the league solves it, but it's certainly, I'm so glad Al Michaels said what he said. And I think more broadcasters have to continue to rip moments like that.
Except Tom Brady. Except Tom.
Right.
Yeah, not
Except
Tom.
Tom can't.
Tom can't do it.
You mentioned the change that it makes for the Ravens. It changes the entire AFC playoff picture. Because right now,
I think so. Yeah, I think that's true.
When you're talking about a Steelers team that only has 2 losses, right? You look at the standings the way they sit right now. If the Ravens take a 4th loss, then depending on what happens this weekend, I realize, that's the weird thing that they haven't played. But all of a sudden, the deficit looks way different in that division. I mean, you could be talking about the difference at the end of the year between a division championship and a wild card by getting an extra win in this game. We don't know what would have happened the way it plays out, but see, Rob, when you start talking about playoff ramifications for seeding, for home field, for the opportunity to win the division versus being a wild card, like this isn't just a regular screw up. And to me, what we have to acknowledge at some point is that TV exists now. So everybody at home is looking at every angle, and the guys on the field can't. That's why I continue to say having an official in the booth that's looking at those same angles can at least either explain the why and the how, because sometimes when these officials come on, we're like, oh, who knew that wasn't a penalty? But they'll at least have the opportunity to fix it when it's egregious and all of America is seeing it. That's the part of this we can't take away. There's 100 different angles.
So what are we going to call it? A booth flag? I'm being honest. Is that what it's going to be? A booth flag?
I guess so. It's tough. I think it's tough to navigate this. I really do. I get it. And I want something in place where we can figure this out and not get calls wrong like that. But it's also could be very unmanageable. And I think, look, this is complete cross sport. I get this. But I watch college basketball. I love college basketball. But we get to the last 2 minutes of college basketball, and it is so bad. It is so bad watching them spend 5 minutes figuring out, is there 10.7 left or 10.1 left? And I don't want that in NFL football either. Again, the last 2 minutes will get so bogged down in flags. But you're right. You could have discretion here. But that opens up a can of worms, and it's just another different argument. I don't know how to completely fix this, but yes, I think at the end of the day, we need somebody up in the booth to just be like, okay, you guys got this wrong. We got to do this over again.
So maybe in the last 2 minutes, we just add the booth as an extra official in the last 2 minutes of a game, and they can issue a booth flag.
Yeah, and here's where maybe I'm the one that's just arguing with Frank today. But here's the thing, Frank. You know what's worse than a game that gets bogged down at the end? Getting screwed out of a win.
Yeah.
I want them to get it right. There's just because you and I share that love of college basketball. And here's the thing. I don't care if I have to sit in my seat for an extra 10 minutes while they figure out how much time is left, as long as they get it right. I want the right team to win. I want the right team that deserves that opportunity to not be screwed out of it by an incompetent call from an official. So for me, I don't care if the game bogs down as long as they get the calls right. And obviously right now, for the pace of play and all those conversations, huzzah, that's one part of it. But they're not getting it right. So if they're not getting it right, we got to fix something.
Yeah, I think it was the great quote by Al Michaels of too many games are ending like this. And it's not just we see it a lot on primetime, obviously, because we're all watching, we're all talking about it, but it's happening on Sundays too. The officiating is, and what kills me is I fight back so much and so often on the whole, the NFL's rigged. That's stupid. Okay. But then something like this happens. I'm like, well, how could I even argue this anymore when stuff like this is happening? I know the NFL's not rigged, but this gives fuel to all the people who think gambling has gotten involved in the NFL and now they want the Ravens to win. And it just becomes this stupid discourse because officials can't get all the calls right. It's hard to officiate NFL games. I get that, but it's not good enough right now. And the NFL needs to figure out a way to make the officiating better.
Booth flag. We invented the booth flag.
Booth flag.
We got it. We've
solved the issue. Can we talk real quick about something? Before we move on, because I know we want to move on. How good is Lamar Jackson? Oh my God!
That's what I was about to say. Yes.
I am starting to kind of get on this hill of Lamar Jackson is already a top 10 all-time quarterback, because I could tell you sitting here that I don't know that I've seen 10 guys who affect a game more than Lamar Jackson. He's about ready to win his 3rd MVP. I think he almost, I don't want to say clinched it because there's a half a season to go, but I don't know how you can vote against Lamar Jackson right now. I get Josh Allen's great, and I got my Jared Goff thing going, but Lamar Jackson is playing at a level that I've only seen a few times in NFL history. And if you go through the list of 3-time MVPs, it's Johnny Unitas, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Aaron Rodgers, Brett Favre, Jim Brown. That's the list. We're talking about 6 of the all-time greatest players in NFL history. Lamar Jackson's about ready to join that list. Super Bowl or not, I'm starting to think Lamar Jackson. I don't think I can name 10 quarterbacks in NFL history who have been better than Lamar Jackson is right now. He is that good. I don't know if he needs that Super Bowl to get on the top 10 list. Dan Marino really didn't. So I'm just in awe of Lamar Jackson. Every time I'm watching him, he keeps getting better and better and better. It's amazing to watch this guy play football right now.
And the crazy thing about it too is, and I talked about this in the midseason QB room. He knew, remember when he pared down, I think he got down to like under 210 this offseason. And I remember the first time I saw him, like the Ravens had posted a clip, and I think it was either OTAs or it was full squad minis, and he ran out, and I was like, oh my God. And I remember having a conversation with someone else where we were like, is someone else wearing Lamar's jersey? Like, is this a joke? Like, is like Zay Flowers or someone else? Yeah. Because he just looked way too thin. And I remember thinking to myself, like, this is a huge mistake. What is he doing? Like, he's going to get hurt again. Maybe he doesn't need to be 240, which is where I think he kind of topped out at, where he looked really top heavy and thick. But he came out and he said, look, he was very cagey about talking about what his weight was. I talked to someone in the organization. They're like, look, he's going to settle in right around 215, maybe a hair under 215. Lamar came out and he said he felt, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically said he didn't feel as explosive as a player. He felt like he lost a little something in terms of that part of his game, his mobility. And I was like, okay, well, we'll see. Yeah, we'll see. Like, he looks, I think a lot of what we're seeing on the field right now is him knowing where he was physically and marrying, I think, where he is now as a quarterback mentally. He's a veteran. He's wise. He understands everything about playing the position now. Yeah. But now he's married that with his physique when he first entered the league out of Louisville, where it was like, oh my God, he's so dynamic as a runner. This is insane. Like, this guy, you cannot stop him as a runner. Well, now he's married both parts of those games. He became the pocket passer that everybody said he couldn't become. He became the one, I would say probably one of the 2 or 3 smartest quarterbacks in the NFL right now. Yep. It's the entire package, and I don't think he has to win a Super Bowl at this. If he wins another MVP this year, and this is kind of where he's going, I don't think he has to win another Super Bowl to be considered in that top 10 quarterback conversation all time. But I do think it feels, now, not super excited about what we saw defensively from them last night, particularly in the secondary. But it does feel like this is the best representation of what they could be and win a Super Bowl, because Derrick Henry did not dominate that game last night. He did not have the 140-yard rushing effort. He got taken out of the scheme for a while, for a period there in sort of like the second quarter. And yet they still managed to score 35 points in a game in which Derrick Henry did not have to dominate. I think they are so much closer winning that Super Bowl. And if I'm the Chiefs, I'm probably sitting there going, throw the flag, let Cincinnati try that 2-point conversion, because you have to feel like it's going to be tight I can't imagine the Chiefs run the table, right? So It's going to be tight when it comes to that playoff seeding at the end and getting that number 1 spot.
And by the way, the play that I at least think I'm trying to get in your head, Charles, here, that's always a scary place. The play I think you're talking about is the one Lamar just keeps retreating and retreating and retreating. Yes. He goes back beyond the 30-yard line. I'm like, what on earth are you doing? And then he just turns a corner on him and tight ropes all the way down to the 1-yard line. I'm like, my God, nobody has done that. Maybe Mike Vick. Mike Vick is the only comp, and Mike Vick never got there as a quarterback the way Lamar has. Lamar right now has a 123.2 passer rating this season. The all-time record is Aaron Rodgers at 122.5. So we're talking about Lamar Jackson, the best runner ever at this position, ever. The best running quarterback we've ever seen, who's about ready to set the single season all-time passer rating mark. Like, that's unbelievable. The way he has married the mental side of the game, like you talked about, with the physical side, the passing side, with the rushing side. This is the guy you create in Madden. This is the guy. It's Lamar Jackson in 2024. He is playing at such a peak that, again, I haven't seen that many quarterbacks reach this level of quarterbacking.
And let me ask you this, because I think this is a really interesting comparison. For the longest time, we have gotten pissed off at Aaron Rodgers because he does so many things his way. He does it his way. He's the smartest guy in the room. He does what he wants, all these different things. Guess what? Lamar might not put himself out there as the smartest guy in the room, but he definitely does things his way. Over the course of his career, at every significant intersection where a decision had to be made, he did it the way he wanted to do it. Whether it was, hey, I'm coming in the league, I'm not going to work out at wide receiver, I'm not going to run a 40-yard dash, I'm going to be a quarterback. The contract, right? The whole contract situation for the longest time, he was stiff-arming the organization saying, I will do it when I'm ready to do it. He waited for other quarterback deals to come in. The weight, changing his physique. And I don't think people in the organization, by the way, he did that on his own. It wasn't like the people in the organization were like, A, put on notice, hey, I'm going to slim down, or B, told him he needed to do it. He just showed up and they're like, oh, okay. Oh, hey, so I guess we're doing this now, And I remember John Harbaugh got asked about it, and John Harbaugh basically was like, all right, like, you're going to see where this goes. It's wild to me that, like Aaron Rodgers, he has done so many things his way. And yet, I don't feel like right now we stare at him and go, how dare he? Instead, I'm like, man, I got to pretty much give this guy credit. Everything he does works out for him. And yet he still hasn't won that Super Bowl, but it's hard to kind of criticize him just because the changes that he makes, when we sit there and we have issues with it, it doesn't take long for the other side of that to resolve and go, oh, it turns out he's right. And he seems to be right about everything. Yeah, right?
He really does. Like, it's amazing.
This is what drives me crazy about the entire way we talk about championships in the NFL. Is that we become a living, eating, breathing Talladega Nights. Like, we're all Ricky Bobby saying, if you're not first, you're last. And it's stupid. It was a stupid line we all laughed at in the movie, and it's stupid the way we cover the sport. I looked it up. He's played 95 regular season games, in which he's got 2 MVPs and may be on the cusp of his third. He's put the Ravens in this situation time and time again. And we're suddenly going to let 95 games get washed away because we don't like the way he's played in 6 playoff games, some of which he's actually played well in, but 6 playoff games. So we're going to let those 6 games be a reason that we just suddenly turn around and poo-poo all over a 95-game body of work. This makes no sense to me. It is clear the greatness of Lamar Jackson. And what's maddening is we did the same thing at one point with Marino, but Twitter didn't exist. There was a time where John Elway had the reputation that he couldn't win the big one, which turned out to be really stupid. There was a time when people said the same thing about Peyton Manning. Can't beat Florida. He's never going to win a Super Bowl. Can't beat Brady. Now we look back and say, well, that was a stupid narrative. Our grandkids are going to look back at the way we talked about Lamar Jackson and say, man, it's really stupid that they tried to find every reason to fault this player over 6 games instead of looking at the 95-game body of work that has been absolutely beyond elite.
And by the way, do you know the Ravens record in his starts in his career? 65-22.
It's absurd.
They're winning 3/4 of their games. He walks off the bus and they're 12-4. Like, this is he's just an amazing player. And I agree with you completely. Super Bowls are a data point, right? And a big one. It's amazing. But he also happens to be playing at the same time as the NFL's Michael Jordan, right? Like, Patrick Mahomes is scooping up all these championships. That's not always his fault. Like, this is still a team game. And the Ravens haven't been good enough to beat the Chiefs or to win a Super Bowl. Lamar Jackson's good enough. Like, if you're sitting there saying, I'm not convinced Lamar Jackson's that good because he hasn't won a Super Bowl, you're doing this thing wrong. Like, you really need to watch more of Lamar Jackson play football.
He also enjoys himself too. I think that's what a lot of fans like. He is fun. He's a lot of fun. And I've brought up how he shows up to press conferences still in his pads, which most people are like, I don't know what that doesn't mean anything. It does mean something when you're a reporter and you cover the league constantly and you see all these quarterbacks who are like, I'm going to take 40 minutes to make sure I'm wearing my suit and I look like this. And you're that concerned about how you look in front of the cameras. This dude just walks in like straight up, like sweating in his pads.
He did last night on the Amazon set.
He did last night on the Amazon set. Yeah. That's it. He's just like, okay, this is business. I'm out here. I'm not going to complicate it or throw all this extra stuff in. And I like too, last night it was funny when he was talking about Derrick Henry, where he made the joke about like, who made you?
Who made you? I think that was one of the great lines.
What did he say? You're 6'3", 6'4", 250 pounds. Like, who made you? Like, I laughed at that. And I'm like,
I did too.
That's what makes him likable, because you're like, yeah, the dude, he's enjoying himself. He's taking this serious, but also not so serious that it turns it into everything is just a business proposition, or, he's not really the grouchy type. Even when he gets upset, and he clearly, I've been in post games where he's pissed. It's not to the detriment really very often of people around him. So, yeah, I mean, this has been the Lamar Jackson hour, but
it should be, because he's the most electrifying athlete in sports right now. Maybe Ohtani, maybe Jokic. I don't know, but he's in that tier where every game he plays is must watch. Every game. Like, I'm tuning in to watch Lamar Jackson. And to the point, like, I've watched football since I was a little kid, 40 years of football. I don't know that there's 10 players who have been more electrifying in my lifetime. That LT's on that list, and maybe you can make a case for Brady and Manning, although they did it a lot differently. Lamar's just so unique. I love watching him play, and it's phenomenal, and it was phenomenal watching him last night.
I would just remind everybody on the quarterback Super Bowl memo that Nick Foles and Trent Dilfer have a Super Bowl. So
yeah, Jeff
maybe
Hostetler
we don't make
has
it about
a Super Bowl.
And Jeff Hostetler, Raider great, has a Super Bowl. Okay, let's get into some winners and losers from the trade deadline. We'll do that when we come back. All right, guys, time to pass out some winners and losers, some awards, some championships that everybody can value. Let's look at some trade deadline winners, not the least of which would be Jared Goff, Frank's true MVP. Jared Goff, C-Rob, you've got the true MVP as a trade deadline winner. Why?
Well, they went and got the defensive piece that they needed to, right? Like Za'Darius Smith, when that made sense and you started to hear it, you almost convinced yourself it wasn't going to happen because it was that one trade where you're like, well, this just makes way too much sense. So of course it's not going to happen. Of course, this is the player they're not going to go and get. But they needed the merc. They needed a mercenary, right? The rest of the season. And Za'Darius Smith is not Aiden Hutchinson. He's not, right? But I think his pass rush win rate, it's like in the teens, close to the teens right now. They needed a presence. I think they needed a presence on the defensive line. I really wished they had. I think there was room to do, make one more move. I think they could have added maybe one more defensive piece or added a wide receiver just to backstop themselves with Jamison Williams down the stretch. But the one guy I think they absolutely had to have, and which would have been a tremendous disappointment if they did not pull the trigger on it, was Za'Darius Smith. And the funny thing about it is, they went into the deadline where they probably could have tried to convince themselves they didn't need him, right? Because they're playing really well defensively. Aaron Glenn is going to be someone who gets, he's going to be on the top of a number of head coaching searches next year. I think there's a chance he gets that Saints job after Dennis Allen got fired. Very well liked in the Saints organization. A lot of institutional memory there for him. But I think he's peaking. Both their coordinators really, I think, are peaking right now. And so to me, they went into that deadline going, hey, we just won a game without Brian Branch, right? We're playing so effective right now, and some of the young players seem to be coming along, and we feel like could be hitting a groove in that second half of the season. Maybe we don't have to go out and spend at the trade deadline. They did it anyway, and to me, that clearly makes Goff a winner. At least they made a move for him, even if it was on the defensive side of the ball, and it showcases, I think, that the organization continues to be all in.
Yeah, and we've seen in the playoffs before, I mean, talking about Goff, how tough it is on a quarterback when you're like, hey, go out there and score 40 because we need it. Like we just talked about that with Burrow.
Please get a stop. Yeah, please get a stop.
Please get a turnover somehow, just once. We could win a game. It's hard on a quarterback to live that way, and I think this Lions defense really well set up. To your point, we talked about this a little bit Wednesday when Jory was on. I wish they would have done more. They didn't give up anything for Za'Darius Smith. A 5th and a 6th, like whatever.
Yeah, it was nothing.
Who cares? No, they had enough ammo to go make 2 more moves if they wanted to. Because like you said, they're probably going to lose Aaron Glenn. Maybe they lose Ben Johnson. He's going to get the interviews. Let's see what he wants to do, I guess, before we did this last year where we're putting Ben Johnson on another team. He didn't want to go yet. Well, but they could lose both coordinators. They have a lot of contracts coming up that are going to make it tough cap-wise for them in the upcoming years. Go all in this year. I think you agree with me, Charles. This is the best team in football, do you think? Lions?
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously you sit there and you stare at the Chiefs and go, well, they haven't lost a single game. But I think the way that the Lions are playing offensively right now is it's insane. And then again, I think defensively, you're seeing some of the younger players are starting to find their footing, and I think that does matter. I thought, to me, the last couple of games of the Lions, particularly defensively, it reminded me of a few years ago when we looked at the Chiefs and we're like, oh, offensive juggernaut. And then all of a sudden that defense, we're like, whoa, I don't know. This defense looks pretty good. There's some younger guys that are starting to creep up on this defense, particularly in that secondary. And we were like, wait a minute, are the Chiefs low key kind of a good defensive team? And then we realized, oh, they really are. They're a very good defensive team. I'm starting to wonder if that's sort of the trajectory of the Lions, where they went from being terrible. We got used to them being terrible. We focused on the offense for so long. And then all of a sudden we're starting to see these hallmarks where we're like, if Aiden Hutchinson was on the field right now, and, I maybe they would still go out and get Za'Darius Smith anyway. Maybe they still would have added that piece. I mean, we'd probably be going, hey, no, they're actually in great shape defensively. Right. It's just we focus so much of that through the Hutchinson injury. But yeah, I mean, they are very complete right now. And I think if you add in special teams where they've been killing it, that's what makes them probably the best. Right now.
In DVOA, obviously Aaron Schatz's thing, they're very, I think, top 2 in offense. I don't know if the Ravens are 1 right now, but they're number 4 in defense, and they're number 1 in special teams. Like you talked about being a complete team, there's really no weakness right now. And maybe it'll get exposed again without Aiden at some point, but Za'Darius is a pretty good fill-in for that. And I don't know, man. This is a line shot. Like if they don't do it this year, if they can't make a Super Bowl, you're going to be like, because Packers are coming, the Bears are coming, the Vikings aren't going anywhere. Just things happen in the NFL. This is a Lions' chance. Like this is you're never gonna have a better chance.
Yeah, the Niners are running into issues. Yeah.
Cowboys are down, and they might be for a while. But the Commanders are coming in the NFC. Like nothing stays the same in the NFL from year to year. We know that. This is the Lions' chance to win a Super Bowl, and I'm all here for it. I think it'd be awesome.
We're just guaranteeing that the Falcons are going to make the Super Bowl out of the NFC.
Yeah, right. We're going to be in New Orleans like, oh, hey, Kirk, wow, what a story.
Do you think, you mentioned Ben Johnson, and I haven't really thought about this till you're talking about it, because Ben was he's the offense coordinator for the Lions, was the hot candidate last year. A lot of people thought the Washington deal was done. Then it didn't happen. And now Washington, obviously very happy. They got, they've got to feel great about where their organization is and where it's headed.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any part of Ben Johnson that regrets maybe not taking that leap last year? Because guys, it doesn't look like there's better jobs available. See, Rob, you shake your head no?
No, I don't think so. He wanted to be part of Detroit.
This. Yeah, if you could be part of, and I hate the Chicago Cubs, but I have to use them as the example. If you were the part of the 2016 Chicago Cubs, you are a legend in Chicago for life. And it doesn't matter whether you were somebody on the bench or whatever. And in Detroit, if you win a Super Bowl this year, it makes it even bigger that you were the offensive coordinator. They'll be talking about Ben Johnson until the end of time if the Lions win a Super Bowl, right? The guy, oh my God, he went on to the Saints and he did whatever, but we don't care. He's our guy forever. He'll get a standing ovation every time he comes back to Detroit. There's something special going on in Detroit this season. I think Ben Johnson saw that and wanted to be part of it.
He's also... The thing is, not a lot of people know him. Like, they don't know his personality. He's kind of a different cat. Like, he's a little bit of an introvert. Yeah, he's kind of an introvert.
What is he like? I don't really know that much about him because he's such an introvert.
So a guy he reminds me of, and I hate to say this because it's such a negative connotation, but I don't want it to be negative. I'm going to say the name. I want people to relax here because you're going to attach all the negativity to him. But Adam Gase was kind of a little like that. Like Adam Gase was a reserved guy. It was funny because when things didn't work out in Miami for him, it was because people were like, well, he didn't know how to schmooze the owner. Like he was just never any good at really, schmoozing the Miami Dolphins owner. And, that always kind of rubs Stephen Ross the wrong way. I don't see Ben Johnson as being a schmoozer. I really don't see it. He's a reserved guy, super smart. I'm curious to see what he would be like consistently at the podium as a head coach. I don't know what that would really look like because we kind of get these little snapshots in time of him. But yeah, he's not going to be out there. It's not going to be Mike McDaniel. I'll put it that way. He's not that type where you're like, oh wow, like this is great. How long? Can we double this press conference time? Let's go 2 hours today. He's just not that type. So I do think his decisions and his priorities are maybe a little different than what we are normally used to, which is I won't say his name, but I saw an offensive coordinator this summer when I was doing the camp tour, And I made a joke to him where it was sort of semi-joke. I was like, hey, man, you're probably going to be popping up on some head coaching lists, in the next rotation. And he was like, awesome, man. How can we make that happen? I was like, he's not that guy. Okay.
Gotcha. There's something to be, and Fitz, I mean, your point, your question, there's something to be said about not screwing up happiness. And yeah, we all just think that coordinators need to become head coaches because that's the next step. And you want to do that. Maybe Ben Johnson just loves creating an offense in the lab and letting Dan Campbell be the guy who's doing 2-hour press conferences, right? Like he's just sitting there like, there's something to be like, there's some coaches that just love coaching mid-major basketball their whole life. And they don't really want to go coach Kentucky, right? Like I'm not saying Ben Johnson is or isn't that, but we always push these guys like, oh, you got to be head coach. You got to be head coach. And it's always weird when Ben Johnson doesn't really want to do. He's like, no, I'm good in Detroit. I just wonder if there's a don't screw up happiness type of aspect to this guy.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that a lot when college coaches, everyone says, well, he might go to the NFL. And it's like, what makes you presume that he thinks the NFL is a better opportunity than where he is right now? So you make a very valid point on what feeds somebody's soul. All right, let's go from winners to losers. And, I know obviously a lot's been made about the Cowboys. We've talked about the Cowboys on this one. Any more thoughts at this point to see, Rob, it's just where they are? I mean, you had Dak Prescott as a trade deadline quarterback loser. At this point, health is part of this too. Like, is there any reason to have hope left for Dallas?
No. I mean, come on. He's got once the hamstring injury. This is horrible.
Oh,
this is terrible. I mean,
what about beyond this year? Because this year's done, right? Like, right. I keep thinking like, can the Cowboys dig out of this next year? Can they dig out of it in 2 years? Like, all of a sudden, you're going to have 3 dudes getting paid, assuming Micah gets paid. Like, what are we looking at from the Cowboys for the next few years? That's kind of this year's done. Like, we all know they're done this year.
I think, Micah is going to get paid. And, when they were paying in the midst of jockeying with CeeDee Lamb, someone in the organization told me, look, Micah is still the number one priority, even over CD. We're just not doing him now. It's going to be in a year. So he's going to be the highest paid defensive player, I think, in the NFL. It'll be very interesting to see how he finishes out this season because they really need him to show up. Whether they make the playoffs or not, he cannot be checked out, right? He has to be top level defensive player of the year-esque Micah Parsons down the stretch. We'll see if that's who shows up when so much of the season seems lost and Dak is not necessarily there. We'll see if he could be a rallying presence for Cooper Rush in that offense.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, I think for me, when I sit there and I look at Dak, part of what I thought made him a trade deadline loser is that they went and got Mingo. And I know you guys talked about this earlier in the week, but it was something that I think we talked about in the pre-production call. The idea that, an executive said to me, stop going back to your scouting reports on guys at the trade deadline. Look at their NFL body of work and let that be what guides you. That's what they look like in the NFL. And if they drop passes in the NFL, they're going to drop passes on your team. Okay. If they run the wrong routes on that team, they're going to run the wrong routes on your team. That's just who a player is after the first couple of seasons of their career. So yeah, an uninspiring pickup, I think, in Mingo. Plus, you overpaid for him with a 4th-round pick, and there was nothing else. There was just nothing else you were going to address. There was no other piece to be added, and we're now at this critical juncture where it's like, okay, Dak's injured. Feels like the season's lost. We'll see. Maybe Cooper Rush can hold it together. I have my doubts.
No.
Mike McCarthy, probably done at the end of the season. And
does he get any grace because he's without his starting quarterback? Is there a spot where we're like, oh, Jerry going to say at the end of the year, we were without Dak for half the year. What do you expect?
If Cooper Rush continues to, put up a winning record under Mike McCarthy, if somehow Cooper Rush pieces it together down the stretch and they can get themselves to the point where they're a threat in the wild card race at the end, maybe. But even then, you're saying Mike is on an expiring deal. Are you giving him a whole new contract?
You're going to give that. Like, Cowboys fans would revolt. Yeah, man.
You're going to give him a 4-year contract extension, which is the norm. No. What are you going to try and tell Mike? Hey, how about if we just do a one year? I think even at that point, Mike would go, nah. I've sat through too many of these press conferences. I've had too many times where, the reporters run to me and say, here's what Jerry just said about, here's what he said about you on the radio show, or here's what he said about your offense or whatever. Like, Mike, I don't think Mike would do a 1-year deal. It's absolutely disrespectful. Mike will do, hey, okay, give me a 3-year deal. If you want to fire me, yeah. I'll walk with 3 years of pay. They're just at such a horrible juncture in the franchise right now. So a bunch of guys are getting paid. The team is not very good. You have some other like aging pieces that, what's going to happen with Zach Martin? That's a big question. I think looking at Zach Martin, you're like, he's probably done as a Dallas Cowboy. What's that offensive line going to look like without him? It just feels like they had their shot. We knew they had their shot. We spent 2 years staring at each other going, this has got to be it, right? Like this has to be the year Dallas puts it together because this isn't going to last forever. And then they kept failing.
I'm just shocked
that window closed.
I'm shocked their window slammed shut so fast. I am. Like me and Fitz, especially
I was
before the season, like this team wins 12 games every year. They're going to be good. They're going to win 10, maybe they regress a little bit, but to go from winning 12 games to probably losing 12 games or close to that, like, man, this happened so quick for the Cowboys, and it's going to be really, really tough unless they just absolutely nail the draft. Like that's what you're going to have to do when you're paying these guys too. You're going to have to find multiple starters out of every draft class for the next couple of years just to get back to that 12-win type of franchise or roster you had.
Yeah, they always say don't bet what you can't afford to lose. I got to remind myself of that because I put a pretty substantial for me bet on the Cowboys 9.5 wins at the beginning of the.
Yeah, that ain't happening. Yeah, that ain't happening.
Yeah. So that should have gone on vacation.
But you guys, the crazy thing about this is it's not like you were alone. Like I at one point, I'm in the office of a general manager of another NFC team. This is during the camp tour. And I had said I'd been through Dallas. I said I started in Dallas. And they're like, what do you think? And I said, I don't know, man. The offensive line looks pretty messed up. The wide receiving core looks horrible without CD. They look very average. Like there's just not much going there. They don't have a running back. I brought all this stuff up and I'm like, I don't know, man. It looks like it could be a pretty bad situation. And he said to me, he goes, but that's always when they're at their best. Like, he's like, I swear every time we think something's screwed up in Dallas, they end up being a really, really good football team. And I was like, that's a good point. There have been other times where I thought everything was, flying off a cliff and it was just flying. And this time, no, it's a brick. that's what they are. So not like we were alone.
I'm going to steal that from you, C-Rob. That feels like a song lyric. I thought everything was flying off a cliff. It turns out I was just flying. There we go. One more quick loser on this. Deshaun Watson, you have, but it raises an interesting question. They trade away Amari. We already talked about Za'Darius Smith. Is Amari Cooper, like, what are the Browns going to do there? I know we've all talked about what has to happen. Then all of a sudden, Jameis doesn't look as good the second week. And I still keep looking at that cap number thinking they're just every single year until they can get out of it, they're screwed. C-Rob, are they going in complete rebuild mode then?
Well, Cedric Tillman is there. I mean, like, he's a dude.
Yeah,
like, he's a dude. They made room for him. For a year and a half, I was asking people in that organization, like, because I liked Tillman coming out of the draft. I thought he had the makeup, at least the build. He looked like a number one receiver. He looked like an ex-receiver. But he came out of a weird offense in Tennessee. And I'm like, I kept asking, like, Kevin Stefanski, like, what do you think? Kevin's like, give it a year and a half. It takes about a year and a half. They gave him a year and a half. And then next thing you know, he comes out and he plays the way that he's playing. And he steps in for Cooper. And instantly to me, I'm like, okay, you're okay there. You look like you have a number one wide receiver. It looks like this guy's going to be the guy. Now, what do you do at quarterback? This is the interesting conundrum now. And now I think it's real. Before, I'm like, you can't do anything. They're stuck with Deshaun, all this stuff. And then, I start to talk to some people in the organization and I'm hearing like, hey, might be looking at turning over the offense next offseason. And I'm like, I don't know what does that mean? Turning over the offense, like, significant changes. It's going to become apparent where we're going pretty fast in the offseason. I'm like, what the hell does all this mean? Then Andrew Berry, the general manager, during the bye week, he gets asked about Deshaun Watson continuing his career. And Andrew Berry basically is like, yeah, anything's possible. And I'm kind of like, okay, like, wow, this is real. They may be engineering a way to either insert someone else in the quarterback room and just go, whatever happens, happens. And we pick the best guy and we move forward. Or I don't know how. I have no clue how, but potentially moving off of Deshaun Watson next offseason. To me, what potentially makes sense is they like someone out there, another quarterback, another veteran quarterback, or maybe one of these young guys. Maybe it's a Bryce Young, maybe it's a Anthony Richardson. I have no idea, but maybe it's a young guy out there. They feel like we can acquire him, bring him in, and just say, we're picking the best guy. We're like, whoever balls out and plays well, we're going to go with that quarterback. And if Deshaun Watson isn't that guy and his feelings are hurt, he can go ahead and he can go ahead and sit on the bench and be mad, but he's still going to get his $43 million. And people will laugh and point and say, look at you have a $43 million backup. And the Browns will simply shrug and go, we did what was best for the team at this time.
You have to.
And what would you rather us do? Continue to start Deshaun Watson when you've seen what that ultimately has produced the last couple of years? At the very least, I think then the door is now open for them to look at the quarterback position and go, we're going to do what we need to do to be a winning football team. And if that means something changes at the quarterback position, no matter what the pain is, we're going to figure out how to navigate that.
Yeah, I just can't see how Deshaun Watson starts another game for them. Like, how could you do that? Like, you've seen it. This is over. It's done. He's not a starting NFL quarterback anymore. I don't really know how it happened. It has never happened this way in NFL history before. Where guys just lost it like this, but it's there.
We see it at the deadline. They move Za'Darius, right? You move Amari Cooper. You start to get draft picks, right? You're clearly moving. You're sitting there and you're saying, okay, here's some expiring deals or some guys that we don't intend on having back next season. Let's get draft capital, right? So you're getting that draft capital to help line the team and improve it wherever you can ultimately improve it. So there's that aspect of it. But, to me, I think they always had the inability to have the conversation that something could change. They would never do that, right? Up until this point, it was always Deshaun's the guy, Deshaun's the guy.
Yeah.
Now they've said, maybe something can change. And
no, it's a big shift. I agree.
It is a big shift. That's a huge shift in that organization. And by the way, another shift that people didn't see was that they didn't let go of key players that they want to be there for whoever is the next quarterback. They got calls on David Njoku, and they said, no, we're not moving this guy. Like, he's one of the best tight ends in the game right now. He's young. He can be a piece. Who's here? There were other defensive pieces that they got calls on. Like, they got inquiries about other defensive pieces. They're like, no, these are core. We still have core. We still intend on being a team that competes.
Their core's not bad. Their core is not bad at all. They were in the playoffs last year with Joe Flacco quarterback.
And they still have a coach that we all respect, right? Like, through all of this, they still have a head coach that, I mean, you can't be reigning coach of the year and then all of a sudden people are like, I can't coach, right? Like,
Matt Nagy.
There are still
come on. Like, he get nothing like that could ever. Jason Garrett, nothing like that could ever.
Do you really think, but do you think it's Stefanski in the same breath as Matt Nagy?
No, I think Stefanski's fine. Like, I look, the Deshaun Watson stuff really, I don't know, man. It was so clumsily handled, but whatever. I do think he's a good X's and O's coach. Yes, I think Kevin Stefanski is not their problem by any means.
All right. We're look, by the way, for the record, if you guys want to pay me $43 million to sit down, be pointed at, laughed at, not play, I'm in for it. I will do that for the sake of the show. I will do that for you guys. It is clear so far as we are this far into the show that C-Rob is the MVP, mostly because he hasn't disagreed with me as much. We'll break down who the midseason award MVPs are so far as when we come back. Gentlemen, it is time to talk about awards. Midseason awards. I hope there were little plaques given out because when you came to quarterback, C-Rob gave out some awards. The quarterback MVP, not the least of which we've already talked about, Lamar. I think we all agree with that. I want to go to the other side. Biggest quarterback surprise for you, C-Rob. And I think this one, there's been some ups and downs, but who did you have on this one?
Well, it's got to be Darnold, right? I mean, I remember Minnesota when they acquired him saying, hey, no, this guy could start for us. Like, he could be our start. I'm thinking, like, come on, look at this. What are you talking about? What a ridiculous thing to say.
Yeah.
Come on.
I know. Yep.
Who's high in that office right now? Like drug test everybody. No, and he's been a remarkably efficient player. As you said, there have been some ups and downs, but he has not reverted back to the something bad happened and now it just all unravels. Sam Darnold.
Last week, there were some bad turnovers. Like, I'm just saying, like, let's not let that be the first chapter of Sam Darnold unraveling. Like, this is the behind the music. Where
okay, but it's still
Sam Darnold unravels. That was a bad game for him last
There's
week.
still a bigger snapshot of the season, and quarterbacks are allowed to have bad games.
No, not anymore.
They do.
No.
You can't be Jared Goff and just every week go out and complete 80% of your passes.
MVP Jared Goff.
MVP Jared Goff.
Not everybody. There are other, like, Joe Burrow's had a bad game this season, right? I mean, like, there are other good quarterbacks, and he's not a Joe Burrow level, right? But okay, Kirk Cousins has had a couple stinkers this season. So give him some grace. It was not his best game. What's going to matter is how he responds to it. And what I would say is there have been games where he has done something bad in the middle of a game. And it's like, oh, here it comes. Like, this is the backslide. Like, that wasn't the greatest quarter. And then he's picked himself up and been fine. And the Vikings have won the game, and we've moved on. So I'm sort of like, that's the micro. This is the macro. Let's watch him give himself an opportunity to rebound and see where this goes. I think he'll have a really good second half of the season. I think TJ Hawkinson will be a good piece for him there. And then I think at the end of the season, they're going to have to make a decision. I don't know where it goes playoff wise, but I think he'll play well enough that there's kind of some consternation. Like, are we keeping this guy? Are we JJ McCarthy? Right now, the plan is what the plan was. He moves on. JJ McCarthy's the starter in 2025. That has not changed. Maybe it changes if Darnold can really put something together in the playoffs for them. But I think easily the biggest surprise of this season.
I'm going to go in a different direction with it, because I think there's a quarterback out there that hasn't had a bad game yet, and he hasn't had a bad game in his career yet, and it's Jaden Daniels. Like, I sit here, I thought Jaden Daniels would be a good player. I didn't think he'd be still kind of riding a perfect game in the ninth inning, right? Like, Jaden Daniels has been so far and beyond what I thought he was going to be as a rookie that, to me, he's the biggest surprise. I get Darnold, obviously a great answer for this, but in a different way, Jaden Daniels has far exceeded any expectation I had for him this year. I thought he'd be rookie of the year. I didn't think he'd be an MVP candidate. Like, he has been on, just like, he has not had a bad game yet. Really, when you look back, like, first game was like, he wasn't great, but he wasn't bad. And the Ravens game, he was fine when they lost. Like, he played pretty well in that game. Every other game they've won, he's been great. Jaden Daniels, to me, is the biggest surprise in that I didn't expect somebody to duplicate the CJ Stroud rookie season the next year. Like, I thought, this is a comet. Yeah. This isn't going to happen again for a while. And Jaden Daniels has been awesome. Like, he's been great.
One of my favorite stories about him, there were a couple linemen. I'm going to do my best at recollecting this story. There's a couple of linemen were heading into the facility. And I think it was like 6 a.m. and they're thinking like, oh, we're going to get in here. We're getting in early. We're going to get our lift in. We're going to be the early guys, all this stuff. We're going to unlock the front door. And they get there and Jaden Daniels is there. He's already lifted and he's like halfway through his film work at like 6 a.m.
Wow.
And they're like, this is crazy. Like, well, this dude is already like, that is some like Kobe stuff, right? That's the like Kobe plays a game and then goes and lifts for 90 minutes afterward hard, right? That's the Kobe in the Olympics for the Redeem team. Guys are coming back from the club at 5 a.m. and Kobe's in the elevator completely drenched from his, 3:30 to 5 a.m. workout. And then, ready to go to the shoot around at 10 o'clock. There's some aspect of him that has captured everyone in that organization. And when I talked to some people there heading into the trade deadline, even they were like, look, our roster isn't like our record and our roster. It's not like our roster's
right.
not, we still got a lot of work to do on our roster. And somehow we are where we are.
That's
and they're like, we're just going to take this momentum and we're going to build into it. And they were clearly going to acquire something into the deadline. I think I talked about it even before they made the Lattimore, trade we talked about on the show. I said, look, they're looking for corners and defensive linemen. They go and they get a solid corner. And I think he's definitely worthy of falling into that surprise.
I just keep thinking about Jory's story over the summer that I was high on the Commanders. Obviously, they're a team I talked about a lot in the summer. But when I read Jory's story about how exactly what you were talking about, Charles, how this guy's already all in. Like he's their first guy there, last guy to leave. And a lot of times that's nonsense. But in this case, you could tell through her reporting and we've talked about Jaden too, just kind of, this guy's different. This is not the norm, especially for a rookie quarterback. He already gets it. And he'd already balled out against the SEC, so we knew the talent was there. And he has matched the talent with like this incredible work ethic and this desire to get better. Just stay healthy, Jaden, because man, the sky's the limit for this kid. I can't wait to see his career unfold.
If he makes it, I will always tell people I was there for the moment where I'm telling that preseason game when he audibled out of that screen and knew he shouldn't, wasn't supposed to, was specifically told not to, and he was like, "F it, I'm going to do this. I'm going to throw a go ball, and I'm just going to get in trouble. This is how it's going to have to be."
And threw a dime. And threw an absolute freaking dime.
Yeah,
at the
absolutely.
Miami Brown, I believe it was. Yeah.
I will never, it will be, and just hearing Dan Quinn be like, that was his Buzz the Tower moment. Like he was going to do it, and we're going to yell at him later, but what the hell? That will always resonate to me, that moment where I'm like, whoa, this dude, he just said, screw it. I'm not going to listen. I'm going to win. I'm going to make this play because I can make this play. And the players were all like, that's pretty sweet.
Yeah.
Okay, so you guys have gone positive with your surprise. I'll go surprise that leads right into your biggest quarterback disappointment, C-Rob, because I am surprised that Anthony Richardson has gotten this far off the rails. I'm also honestly surprised that the organization wasn't prepared for this possibility. We've talked about that a lot. Like, I think the Colts right now are absolutely failing the development of Anthony Richardson. I understand he's terrible, but they had to anticipate that when they drafted him. So this whole situation, where we are, how we got here with Anthony Richardson, is your biggest disappointment. I agree with that. I also think it's my biggest surprise, C-Rob.
Yeah, I mean, it's to me, it goes back to, and it's a difficult argument to have now because we've seen rookies have success starting, right? I mean, look at what's going on with Jaden Daniels. Some semblance of Caleb Williams starting, from day one. There have been ups and downs there, obviously, but it's positive enough that you're like, okay, yeah, that feels like it was the right decision to make with Caleb. Clearly, it was the right decision to make with Jaden Daniels. Drake May has played well enough that you're kind of like, maybe they should start this guy at the beginning of the year. Bo Nix, right, has been day one starter, and that's gone reasonably well for the Denver Broncos. But then you get a guy like Richardson. I think the disparity, though, is he didn't play football. I mean, he had a year in college at Florida, obviously, where he started, but there was a ton of missed time prior to that. He missed time in high school. And it just goes back to the Trey Lance thing. And I think we've discussed this now, where now you have two players, very similar players, where you're sitting there and you're staring at them and you're going, man, tools, amazing, awesome. Put some tape down in college, really basically a season of tape in college, where you're like, that looks like a first round pick. And then when they go through the combine process, you're like, that looks like a top 15 pick. All of a sudden it's a top 10 pick. And then they get to the NFL and they go horribly wrong. And part of it is injuries for both of them, Trey Lance and Anthony Richardson. Injuries derailed them in some sense. But then another part of it is they just hadn't played football. And once they had to play football, they're playing at the highest level possible. And nothing is going right. And you start to wonder how much that creeps into their confidence, their ability to lead, a multitude of different things. I am of the mind now where I would hope every single general manager out there, every single head coach, really it drills into their head. If they did not play football on the college level, if they only did it for a year, you cannot draft these guys in the top 10 and then start them from day one. You need to sit them maybe for a year. Maybe you need to sit them for an entire year before you decide to insert them onto a football field. And I hate to monologue here, but it pisses me off when I hear people say you can't learn anything if you're not starting. That is bull. That's not true. Granted, there are some things you can't learn, absolutely, and playing games is the best way to learn, but you can work on mechanics. You can work on footwork. You can work on your platform and how you throw the football, your release. You can learn an offense in classroom work and practice. You can run scout team. You can build a relationship with younger players on the roster. You don't learn as much, but you also don't damage as much if you're not ready for that experience. And clearly Anthony Richardson wasn't. And I hope they have not ruined the ability to potentially still turn him in the right direction.
That's all. Yeah, all very well said. I'm in favor of playing a guy, but there are cases. Anthony Richardson probably shouldn't have been playing. Like he probably shouldn't have been the fourth pick of the draft either. Like it just was asking too much. By the way, real quick, different disappointment. Anthony Richardson is the answer, but Anthony Richardson ain't making $55 million a year like Trevor Lawrence. And I just keep seeing Trevor Lawrence get worse and worse. And I get there's a hive. I've probably activated it of, oh my God, they don't block for him. And oh my God, they drop passes. And oh my God, here's this excuse and that excuse and that excuse. And at some point, you're the guy making $55 million a year. Trevor Lawrence, I think, is a jury in? Like, at some point, what quarterback is really taken off after this many years?
Let me throw a curveball at you, though. Okay. Sure. They had something going with Tank Bigsby, right? All of a sudden, you got this running back. He's physical. Mm-hmm. You could see the energy level of the offense changed when he was having big games. Just a hard-nosed player, and it felt like the offense balanced out a little bit. Obviously, Christian Kirk breaking his collarbone and being, taken out of that mix does not help Trevor Lawrence. Travis Etienne comes back, and all of a sudden, Doug Peterson goes, yeah, let's go ahead and shift the offense back to Travis Etienne. And it looked like, and you're sitting there and you're staring at it. You're going, why? Why would you do this? Why would you take an element of your offense that was working so well and that clearly the team had confidence in this player, and now you change it back to this finesse player who's been banged up, who now granted has had great seasons for you in the past, but had not this year, and you moved off him to another player who clearly had a monumental impact for you. I think, to me, I was like, if there's a fireable offense for Doug Peterson, this is without even looking at the rest of it, which in and of itself is a fireable offense. That, to me, if you're ownership, you're going, I don't know why you did that, and you really seem to have you just changed the entire momentum, the entire feeling of this team and this offense by going back to a player for a reason. Like, I can't discern why you would do it. Why you would shift this entire look, the physicality, who you are, you shift it back to a player that takes you back to a scheme element that's not working.
Sure, but I still don't think that has anything to do with Trevor Lawrence missing passes. I really don't. Like this, at some point, you got to be that dude. He's just not. Like it's tough. I want him to be good. I want great quarterbacks in the NFL. And Trevor Lawrence was supposed to be a great quarterback. He's paid like a great quarterback. And it just, every year, you're left with the same feeling of, well, maybe next year, maybe. Dude, they nailed the Brian Thomas pick. Brian Thomas Jr. is a dude. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
He should have been a top 10 pick. He probably should have been picked where Roma Dunze was. Not that I'm giving up on Roma Dunze or anything, but Brian Thomas should have been a top 10 pick. Like, you nailed that pick for it. Like at some point you got to do it, Trevor, and he just hasn't. And that's why I'm disappointed, because you just expect more out of Trevor. Whereas like Anthony Richardson, like I could see how that went off the rails. With Trevor, I don't know how this has never gotten on track for him. Like I just want to see some like he had that 1 8-game stretch at the end of his second year, and that's been basically it. Like there's been no wow elite Trevor. Like it just hasn't happened, and that's a disappointment for me.
So, boys, it might be good to be drafted in a election year, because in the 2020 draft for quarterback, we have Burrow, Tua, Herbert, Love, and Hurts, right? And this year, it looks like maybe a bunch of teams have hit the home run.
Yeah.
Here's what I did. I looked at every other draft at quarterback, the top 4 quarterbacks drafted over the last 10 years, right? And if you take out, we don't know yet with Kyler Murray, we don't know with Trevor Lawrence. If you take those 2 names out and call them incomplete, out of all the other quarterbacks we're talking about, so you're talking about 40 quarterbacks drafted, 5, if you include Deshaun Watson, actually had success with the team that they were drafted. 5 out of 40.
Wow.
So I just if you start looking at these numbers, this is why I tell everybody, if you think that Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders is your savior, I get it. I know we all want this to be a Burrow. We want a Burrow to a Herbert. Love,
this is
Hurts.
This is a Raiders segment. We
just
did the Raiders segment.
This is
I should start playing the autumn wind right now.
You mentioned Anthony Richardson is a failure. What do we expect? Like quarterbacks drafted more often than not, about 90% of the quarterbacks that are drafted over the period of this decade are going to fail in the NFL. So
okay, let me ask you this then. Aaron Rodgers had to sit, right, for way longer than any of us thought he would, and he turned out okay. Jordan Love had to sit for way longer than any of us thought a first-round pick would sit. And, okay, like I'm saying, if he's healthy, when he's been healthy, Jordan Love has looked like he's going to make it, right? Like looks like he's going to be a guy. Maybe there's something to actually saying
Mahomes sat.
Mahomes sat. He did play that last game of his rookie season, but he sat obviously the balance of the as one GM said, they kept the Ferrari in the garage for an entire year, and they don't know how they do that. Let's see. I think Penix is going to be a really interesting test case.
I was going to say, you're talking about Michael Penix right now. And everybody just absolutely dumped on that pick, right? How could you possibly do this? Whatever. We might look up in 2 years and it's like, well, the Falcons won the AFC or the NFC South 2 straight years.
Okay, but they still could have told their quarterback
out of the garage.
They still could have told Kirk Cousins.
Like there's a lot.
There's still a screw up. Like, you put 100 on black at the roulette table and it hits and you win. You're right. Like this could be best for Penix, but the Vikings still could have handled that a lot better.
But at the end of the day, it's like we might look up at 2026 opening day. It's like, Michael Penix, okay, this was actually pretty smart. And maybe other organizations are going to look and say, like Charles was talking about, maybe we should just have a plan to sit a guy for 2 years. Maybe that we revert to Carson Palmer never playing a snap as a rookie after being the first pick.
And the really interesting thing about the Falcons is, and we were there, I was there, it was insane when they took him. But the thing about the Falcons, it was so intentional. It was so intentional. They're like, yeah, we've got a guy. We paid him $100 million in guaranteed money. We're absolutely taking this quarterback and we're going to sit him. And people are going to think we're insane, including me. I'm like, what the hell are you doing? Mm-hmm. This was very intentional. So if it works out, they did something and should get every pat on the back because it was against the grain in every possible way. It was intentional as hell. And if it ends up working out in the long run, and when I went through there organizationally, the explanation I got, and it was even prior to going through there in the summer, part of it was Arthur Blank looked at Patrick Mahomes sitting that entire year, and Arthur Blank was on board when they said, what do you think about taking this quarterback? And, Arthur Blank, it was basically like, look, the Chiefs did it with Mahomes, best player in the NFL. Maybe not now. Lamar probably has an argument. That's a fun.
That's a segment. That's a
fun argument now. Lamar or Patrick Mahomes. Ooh. But the Chiefs did this with Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
What do you think? And Arthur was like, well, we've never done that before. Okay, all right, you guys want to do it? I'm on board with it, and we'll see how it ultimately works out. Right now, it feels good.
This to be good, yeah. And there's also, by the way, if let's say Kirk Cousins suffers a high ankle sprain this week, you have a really, really high-end backup quarterback that could lead you to a division title. That's part of the math. You think you do. Yeah, who knows? We don't know. But that's part of this math, too.
The other thing that we're not, as we put a bow on this, the other thing I'd say is stability. You don't draft a quarterback you're not playing unless you have confidence and stability in an organization. And the very first time, when I was just a little podcast years ago that nobody had ever heard of, and I was trying to make my transition from music to media, I got the chance to interview Adam Schefter. And one of the first things I asked him is, what's the difference between a good football team and a bad football team in all your years of being around these teams? And Schefter, without hesitation, said, stability. If you can find an organization that can accomplish stability, that organization will have a better chance of winning year in and year out. Is that always true? Maybe not. But having the ability to draft a quarterback and say, hey, we're not going to play him for a couple of years means the GM's confident his job's not on the line. The coach is confident his job's not on the line. The organization has a long-term vision of what they're trying to accomplish. Those are the things that teams that suck never seem to have. It's just a difference in the way they do business. We couldn't do business without Emmy behind the scenes doing God's work. She's always amazing. She's incredible. Follow us on Twitter at Charles Robinson. I should actually say his full name at Yahoo Schwab, at Jason Fitz. You guys know that. Rate, review, subscribe. Tell your friends, your family, tell your enemies, tell everybody to hang out. Give us a review. The reviews really help us. So if you've listened to this long in the show, then take the extra 10 minutes, go out and write a dang review. Tell everybody that we're awesome. Inside Coverage will be back Sunday to recap week whatever this is, week 10, week 11. Week 10.
Week 10.
We'll be back week 10 to cover it. Thank you so much for listening to us.